Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek, especially the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. Or at least it usually is. Today we are going on our first Holodeck Adventure, and just like in Star Trek, the holodeck is going to take us to a different fictional world. This is going to be our chance to share things outside of Trek that we are also interested in, and we think you might be interested to see as well. However, for our first Holodeck Adventure, you'll notice some similarities to our other content. First, this is going to be about another space-based science fiction franchise, and it's another role-playing game. So it's time to get everybody and the stuff together as we review the Cowboy Bebop role-playing game. So, computer, load up program Cowboy Bebop 1. 3, 2, 1, let's jam. As this is a review, it is going to be utilizing our usual alert system. If you haven't watched the channel before, you might not be familiar with it. We are still serving aboard a Federation starship. We are in the holodeck after all, so we are using the alert system. For things that we think you should pay attention to, that's the yellow alert. For things that we think are great, that's the red alert. And the very rarely used things that are groundbreaking game changers, that's the black alert. So as usual for the reviews, I'm going to hop down into a tiny window and I will be fiddling around with my notes while I put appropriate graphics or things I'm discussing on screen in a larger area. So let me jump down there now. And here we are. It's time to start our review for the Cowboy Bebop tabletop role-playing game. This is a game that is made by Don't Panic Games and Manga Project Studio. It's a combined effort, and of course Cowboy Bebop is by Sunrise and Bandai. Some of the key points about this role-playing game is it's extremely narrative. It is a very narrative game, even more so than Star Trek Adventures, and I'm probably going to be relating a lot of what I talk about here to the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, just as a way of framing it, because it's similar and extremely different at the same time. Now, one thing that it is similar to Star Trek Adventures in, how Star Trek Adventures, which I love, it is best played. Star Trek Adventures is best played as you are doing an episode of a Star Trek TV show, making your own Star Trek series. That is the purpose, the general design principle behind Star Trek Adventures. It's even heavier here in Cowboy Bebop. This game isn't designed to be a freestyle sandbox for the Cowboy Bebop universe. This is designed to create your own Cowboy Bebop style anime series, with each episode or session, as they're called, being unique and following a very similar structure to what you would have seen in the anime, if you have watched the anime. If you check this out now, this game is not physically released yet. The PDFs are available on DriveThruRPG, but the physical copies are not ready yet. If you were following in the Kickstarter and you were checking the game out, you might have seen the playtest quick start rules back then. You might have downloaded it, you might have tried it. It changed dramatically from the very first playtest rules until the end. And this final product is an even bigger change from what we saw in the playtest. Honestly, when I was in on the Kickstarter and I was reading the playtest rules, I really didn't have a grasp on how this game would play. It barely felt like a game to me, even at the end, the last version I saw the playtest rules. And I still backed it, but I thought, maybe this is not going to be a game you play. Maybe it's just going to be a beautiful thing to collect. But I'm so happy to announce that this final product, they really improved upon what they had in the playtest. It is a full-fledged game now, and I think it even was back then, but it is so much better explained that I finally understand what they were going for with it. It was just so different. I couldn't really grasp what the game was about. I can say if you had the same concerns for the playtest, don't worry. It's all fixed. It is so much better now. So there we go. The last main point is this system is extremely thematic, and the design captures the flavor and the setting of Cowboy Bebop. And that can be a pro and that can be a con, and I will get into that as we go along. Just very quick, and hopefully quick, because I wrote a lot of notes down, but very quick, Cowboy Bebop, if you're not familiar, it's a science fiction anime. 25 years ago, 1998, was released, I believe, and it features the crew, a group of bounty hunters. They're not great people. They're not nice people. I mean, they're not bad people either. They're just people trying to get by, more or less. And they live on the ship called the Bebop. They are bounty hunters, so of course they're going after bounties. It's like a space age western. But it's set across the solar system that has been colonized in the near future. It's a very... The whole solar system, too, it's very desolate and a little bleak. Everything feels isolated. You really... Outside of like the major casinos and major corporation city centers where all the rich people are congregating, everything feels really isolated and secluded. It feels almost dystopian. And it's a very unique looking setting. And if you've never seen the anime, I highly recommend it. I'm not a huge anime fan. And I wasn't even a huge anime fan back then. But this series grabbed me. There's just so much about it that it's really hard to describe concisely when I have a whole big, large game review to do, so I'm not going to dwell on it. I just recommend, if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's an amazing original style that I've never seen before. It's like Western science fiction 70s. It feels kind of like the 70s too. So if you mix all that genre together, you might get an image of what Cowboy Bebop is about. Now, again, like I said, they're bounty hunters, so they're chasing bounties, but the bounties are never simple. It's not just, okay, we gotta catch this bad guy and we'll get money. The bounties usually have a deep, tragic backstory or something dark behind them that makes them sympathetic, where it's not just, okay, we're gonna catch the person and we're done with it. These complicated backgrounds make it much more difficult for the crew of the Bebop to complete their job, because you can start to relate with these people. Maybe they're not really criminals, maybe they are criminals, but you can see their point of view or what drove them to what they're doing. It's really deep, it's really character driven, it's really story driven. It's not just mindless action, and that is reflected in this game. The other huge part about Cowboy Bebop is it's very heavily influenced by music and music genres. The names of each episode has some correlation to a style of music. And if you watch the show, you're probably very familiar with the amazing soundtrack, which again is unlike any other anime I've seen. It is such a unique series. And again, this role-playing game grabs onto all those major themes you see in Cowboy Bebop and makes it a big part. Music being one of them, one of the main ones. So as we go along, you're going to see and hear a lot of music-related terminology. So let's jump into Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the rules. So very simple enough, the rules of the game. In this game, the game master, the GM, is called the Big Shot. The reason being, on the Cowboy Bebop anime, there is a TV program that gives all the announcements of all the bounties that are available, and it's called Big Shot. So you, as the GM, you play the Big Shot. You're the one providing the bounties and structuring each session. The players, of course, surprise, surprise, are the bounty hunters. And in this game, the dice, you're only using 6-sided dice. There's no fancy dice for this. It's very simple, so you probably have enough to play the game already. Each episode of the game, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's played like an episode of the anime or your Cowboy Bebop style anime. It's called a session, just like in the series itself. And again, session, like a music session. Now there are going to be a lot of terms, and some of them are going to be confusing because they might represent things you know from other role-playing games if you're a gamer, but it's given a music theme, so it's probably not going to be clear immediately off the bat just by hearing it, what it represents in role-playing terms. So that might be confusing at first, but the game itself is actually extremely rules light and very simple to play. So going into the session, just like Star Trek Adventures, the default is it's broken into 3 acts. And these acts are called tabs. Again, here we go with the music. So there's 3 tabs, and it's a building structure of finding out what your mission is, discovering all the details, and then trying to conclude your mission. So these 3 tabs, I'll get into the details of them in a little bit. It's pretty interesting, but the players themselves, if you look at the character sheet, there are no skills, there's no statistics, you don't have any numerical value on your sheet for your character. I thought that was very, very interesting. Again, very narrative. So it's similar again to Star Trek Adventures, but Star Trek Adventure, of course, does have stats. It has attributes and everything. Now this, no stats. They have instead traits. And you'll see that there are a bunch of hexagons on the character sheet, broken into 5 different sections. And there are 3 slots in each section. So you could have a maximum of 3 traits in any of those sections. I'll get into what those sections are later. The traits are what determine if you're going to be rolling extra dice when you're doing a task or not. But the actual amount of dice you're rolling is determined by the tab itself. That sets the base number. So if you're on the first tab, you're starting with 1 die, I believe. If you're on a second tab, 2 dice or something along those lines. Don't quote me on all that stuff yet. I'm trying to go through this fast, and I haven't played the session yet. I just read the rule book 2 times, so I'm trying to get through this while it's all fresh in my mind, but I'm going to forget some things. Now, most of the sessions include a bounty. Not all of them will, but every bounty also has a secret. And so the bounty cannot be caught until you discover that secret. And the secret is going to be the things, like I mentioned, they're complicated paths that are going to make things more difficult for you to succeed in your mission. Or just change the direction that the story goes in. So that's a very interesting structure that each episode, at least the bounty related episodes, are going to follow. Now, there's also resources in the game, and there's resources and there's also going to be currencies. They are not the same. Again, slightly confusing, but all of this may be things you've seen before in other role-playing games. As for the resources, you have the positive resources called Rhythm for the bounty hunters, and for the Big Shot, it's called Risk. So what they do using these resources depends on the tab. So if you use one of your Rhythm as a bounty hunter in the first tab, it's going to provide you with different effects you could choose from. But in the second tab, that will be expanded upon. And in the final tab, again, you're going to be adding new things. So determining when and how to spend your rhythm and your risks will depend on how you want your narrative to go. And lastly, the bounty hunters and the big shot also have a special ability. The big shot, not really, but the bounty themselves, they'll have a special ability called their groove. Again, more musical terms. Grooves I'm going to talk about later, but these are the things that make them very unique and individual. As I said, they don't have stats, they don't have talents, they don't have things. They just have their traits, but they also have a groove that is going to give them a pretty strong ability in the game. Now, when you play the game, you roll tests. It's like your skill checks, your task roll. One different thing here, and you know what? I'm going to give this a yellow alert because I think this is an interesting thing. The big shot, the GM, the big shot does not roll dice in this game. It's only the bounty hunters that roll the dice. So when it's time for a skill check, basically the bounty hunters, the players, they are the ones who ask for a skill check. They're the ones that determine, okay, they want to make a skill check. So it's the bounty hunters, the players, who are framing when it's time to roll the dice or not. And of course, the GM, the big shot, will agree or disagree on whether it fits or not to do. But the GM themselves, they're not rolling dice. I thought that's, for me, I haven't seen that in any game I've played yet. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to keep in mind. This is very story driven, and a lot of that is put on the players themselves rather than the GM. So when you do your task roll, or in this case they're called tests, you're trying to do it only at a time where it's going to push the story forward. So there's not going to be meaningless skill rolls to do mundane things. You're going to be assumed to do everything you want to do until it comes to a crucial point where success or failure are important to figure out. So whether you succeed or fail is going to change the course of that story. That's when a test is going to be called for. When you roll the test, these are going to generate currencies. As I said, there's resources that you spend to affect the whole tab, and then there's the currencies that you get when you actually roll the dice. There's the negative currency, there's the positive currency. Hits are what the players gain for themselves. They are the positive ones, and shocks are the ones that are negative that the big shot would spend to advance towards the negative ending. And each test, here's a part that maybe gets a little confusing the first time you read it, but it's a major part of this whole role-playing game. It's a major part of the system. But each test, as well as many other things in the game, will have an approach. And the approach is a different music genre. There are 5 approaches, and if you notice on the character sheet where you had your traits in the 5 different slots, or the 5 different sections, those are the 5 music genres that comprise this game. You have rock, dance, blues, tango, and jazz. And these 5 approaches are how you're going to narrate your character approaching the test that they are doing, their skill roll. Now, each genre, each, what's it called? Approach, in this case, each approach signifies something different. So the rock approach means calm in the face of danger. It means you're in an action scene and you are focused on committing that action. So it's kind of like Control, possibly in Star Trek Adventures. Whereas dance is for the dramatic flair. It's recklessness. It's the energetic action role. That would be maybe daring in Star Trek Adventures. Blues is the spirituality. It's the reflection. It's the inward looking approach to accomplish a task. Tango is your persuasion. It's the charming or seductive nature, how you might accomplish a goal. And the last one is jazz. Jazz is very technical, so it's your analysis. It's your applying skill and technique on a situation. So when you want to accomplish a task, again, only when it's going to drive the narrative forward, you are going to determine how your character approaches that task. Is it going to be wild and reckless? That's your dance approach. Is it going to be calm and focused? That's your rock approach. Are you going to analyze for weaknesses? Look for the best point to make the attack. That's your jazz approach. So you decide which approach it is, and if you have a trait in that approach on your sheet, you can use that trait to add extra dice. That's where it comes in. Now, when you make your roll, the bounty hunter, again, the narrative is on you, the player. So the bounty hunter will describe the test. They will describe the results of what happened, because you're describing, like a TV show, you're describing what you see on screen. It's a very visual game. So you want to narrate what the viewer at home watching your anime series is seeing on screen as you are acting this out. That's what the game asks you to do. That's what the game, really the purpose is. It tells you to play your characters or drive your character like it's a stolen car. Make it big, make it dramatic, make it exciting for the viewer. And they want you as the player to narrate it. So it's not on the GM, the big shot, like it would be in most games. The majority of this is going to be on the player, while the big shot keeps framing it to make sure the story stays together and heads in the right direction. Now, I mentioned earlier that you have a dice pool. The dice that you roll, not based on the stat, because there are no stats. It's based on the tab. 1, 2, or 3. So again, first tab you roll 1 die, 2 dice on second tab, 3 on the final tab, and you get, again, any trait that you use that fits the approach that you applied to that skill. If you use that trait, you'll get a +1 d6 to roll for that. And each episode, each session, that's what it's called, each session is also given a genre at the beginning. One of the 5: rock, jazz, blues, tango. Each session itself has a genre, so if the approach you use for the task matches the genre of that episode, you also get another bonus d6 to roll. So it helps to kind of plan out how you want to do it. And again, it keeps it thematic. So if this is a rock episode, it's an episode about staying cool under fire, about being very direct in what you're doing. So if you do a lot of rock actions, it's staying in theme with the episode, and therefore you get the bonus to your die roll. So it's trying to maintain the feeling of the genre that's chosen for that episode. So I think that's a really cool idea. Now, the next thing, what do I have here on my notes? Yes. So when you make your roll, on the test, you're looking for hits. Hits are your successes. You can get a maximum of 2 hits when you do a test. 1, if you beat the difficulty number, and the difficulty is set by what tab you're on and other risks that are spent or rhythms that's spent by the players and the bounty hunt or the big shot. And you can get a second hit if you roll 2 6s in your dice pool. So 2 hits are the maximum you can get. However, you also always generate negative currency as well, the shocks. So every 1 that is rolled on your dice pool when you do a test, that generates a shock for the big shot. Now, if you don't roll any 1s, you're still always going to generate 1 shock. So even if you got all 6s, yeah, you might hit your 2 hits, but the big shot is still going to gain 1 shock, because every time you advance the story, there is going to be a little bit of risk involved, so the shock goes to the GM. When you
when you get the shocks, now, I again, this is so different from some of the games we played. So at this point in the rules, it's not going to make sense yet what the shocks and hits do, but you use them to advance the story, and that's done by means of clocks. And I'm going to get to clocks in a second, but let me just finish out with what the die rolls and skill checks are. Just hang in there. Like I said, the first time you go through this, you might be confused. Just bear with me here, because it really isn't as hard as the crazy terminology makes it seem. So you get hits and you use them on the objective to push the story forward. The shocks can be used by the big shot to push forward the failure objective. So whichever one is completed first determines whether that tab is a success for the players or a failure for the players. But you might generate a lot of shocks, and you can use different ways of absorbing those shocks to cancel them out before the GM uses them to push that objective towards failure. You do that, one way is by wounding your traits. So the traits that you use to gain the extra die, you will wound, you could cross it out, and you can't use that trait anymore unless you heal it, and there are ways to heal it. There's also hard wounds that they could get where it's double cross out and you can't use it at all for the rest of the session. But that's one way of absorbing shock. You could absorb 2 shocks with that, taking them away from the big shot. Or you could also mark a bullet on your character sheet. And each character sheet has at the top, a center, it looks like a 6-shot chamber. It's a bullet, and you can mark one off, and that will absorb a shock. Now, when all 6 bullets are marked off, something bad happens. So you have to be careful about that. All of this, again, I'm going to explain in time, but just keep in mind, there are ways to mitigate the dangers that you are generating when you do your skill checks, but you're also building a bigger risk of other bad things happening, which I think is pretty interesting. Now, the next part, let me see. Okay, rifts. Yeah, the last thing I want to do about the checks, there are things called rifts, which are, again, kind of special abilities, or just like special things you can activate when you're doing a scene or when you're doing a test. Each of them has a different way to activate. So you might have to mark one of the bullets, like I said, to activate a specific rift. You might voluntarily roll with disadvantage to activate a different rift. You might generate more shocks for the GM to do another rift. So even though your character doesn't really have traits, they have only traits, which are just physical descriptions. They don't really have skills. They don't really have talents aside from the groove. You all have access to the same pool of rifts that you could do to help yourself out or to make things a little more interesting for the story. Okay, so the next thing I need to talk about are the clocks. Clocks are a major part of this game, and I would say in Star Trek Adventures terms, you could view clocks as extended tasks, or the negative version, extended consequences, because the clocks represent the objective you are trying to accomplish. Now, each game will typically have one objective clock that the players are trying to fill up by spending their hits. Each hit will tick one part of the clock. If that whole clock fills up because of the hits you spent, you succeed. You succeed in that objective. But there is also a threat clock, at least one threat clock when the tab starts, and that clock the big shot is trying to fill up
to reach the end that will mean you failed that tab, so you don't achieve your objective. When you roll your test, you'll get hits, bounty hunter will get shocks. They are spent to fill up these clocks. There are typically 4 clocks, 6 clocks, and 8 clocks. So that's how many you have to tick off before you complete that objective. Now, you might be wondering, can I use a hit to fill a threat clock? Yes, you can. And the big shot can even use a shock to fill the objective clock if they so desired. Why would you want to do that? Well, it might be more interesting for your story. It might lead to a much better narrative. So again, the narrative is huge in this game. It's about telling the best story possible. That doesn't necessarily mean succeeding in what your objective is. You might be able to find something more interesting by failing the main objective. As I said, each tab starts with at least one objective and one threat clock, but during that tab, as you're playing, you as the bounty hunters, you could create additional objectives that you want to accomplish and create new clocks. So you could ask for a new clock, and the big shot too could create another threat clock that might affect another objective you're trying to do as well, or take you down a different path. So clocks are going to be a huge part of this game. The bullets that we talked about earlier, that's basically a 6 clock that's ticking down to something major negative happening for your character specifically. So once you get a hang of the clocks, which is very easy, again, it's just ticking your way to the end of that scene, or the tab in this case. And each tab is going to have its own clock. Whichever fills up first, that's going to trigger the outcome. Both the objective and the threat clock might fill up at the same time, and that's fine. You just narrate what that represents, that both the failure and the success happened at the same time. So you succeeded in what you want to do, but something negative happened as well. So again, all about the narrative, all about telling the best story possible. Each clock, threat clock, and objective clock, and any additional clocks that you make will have their own genre. They'll have their own approach. Same thing, rock, dance, blues, tango, and jazz. And these are going to determine what that objective or what that risk is about. For example, if it's a rock clock, that objective is going to be about overcoming something powerful or something threatening. If it's a dance clock, it's going to be an objective that shows something energetic. It's showing something enthusiastic. If it's a blues clock, it's going to be overcoming something doubt or regret. If it's tango, it's going to be an objective to persuade someone to do what you want. If it's a jazz clock, it's going to be concerning understanding or solving a problem. And the threat clocks as well, they are going to have their own approach. And what that determines is if the threat fills up, whatever approach that clock had is going to reflect in the consequence that the bounty hunters face. So clocks, major portion of this game. Once you get the hang of what they represent, which is really easy, it's going to be smooth sailing. The only thing you have to worry about is getting your head around the crazy terminology. So that's chapter 1. That's the rules. I think chapters 1, 2, and 3 are the huge ones. After that, it's very easy to explain what the last parts of this book are. So let's jump right in. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Sessions. And this is about the type of episodes you can play in Cowboy Bebop. There are 4 types of sessions which reflect the 4 styles of episodes you see in the Cowboy Bebop anime series. You have the classic session, which is your typical, you have a bounty you're trying to hunt, you're discovering the secret, their backstory, and you're trying to resolve it to the best of your ability. There are personal sessions. These are episodes that are focused on at least one, usually just one specific character. It deals with their backstory or something weighing on them. There's the filler sessions. These are kind of fun. These don't really fit anywhere. They could have a bounty. They might not have a bounty. They are the oddball episodes that you could do to just more or less let your hair down and just have fun with the setting. And then there are the season breakpoints. These are the big two-parter episodes sprinkled throughout the series, including the season finale. So when you start a session, it has 3 tabs, as I mentioned before. The 3 tabs are named after the opening lines of the theme song for Cowboy Bebop. That if you never heard it, the song is called Tank by the Seatbelts and composed by Kanno Yoko, I believe is her name. Such a good opening theme song. But the 3 tabs, tab number 1 is called Get Everybody and the Stuff Together. A little unwieldy, but they abbreviate it to GEST. So GEST, that's Get Everybody and the Stuff Together. This is the tab where you are basically doing just that. You are gathering all the information, all the things you need. Once you know what you have to accomplish, you find out what the bounty is, you figure out the plan, you come up with your idea. What do I need to do to catch this bounty? Now I'm going to give a very quick yellow alert here. Just interesting yellow alert that I think you might be interested in. The original name for tab 1 was Smooth Talk. Smooth Talk, but if you see, the next 2 tabs are named after the next 2 lines of that opening line of the song. So the Get Everybody and the Stuff Together name for this tab came from me. I suggested it to the creators. They ran it by Sunrise and Bandai and whoever has to approve it. And they came back and said, yeah, we're using that for the book. So, hey, I got an idea into the book. My first contribution to a role-playing game. How about that? So tab number 1, Get Everybody and Stuff Together. Tab number 2, very, very appropriately titled 3, 2, 1. It's a countdown. So this is where, again, this is the middle point. This is the middle act. You are counting down to the finale. So this is the rising action where you're setting all the pieces up for the big, grand, explosive conclusion for the episode. So everything's kind of falling into place. Usually this is where you would discover the secret for the bounty. And the final tab is called Let's Jam. That's when it's balls to the wall. Everything's going wild. It's do or die. You are going to either catch the bounty or you're going to fail at what you are doing. So this is the big finale. Get Everybody and Stuff Together, 3, 2, 1, Let's Jam. Those are 3 tabs. Each tab has its own set difficulty. It has its own main objective, its main threat clock, and when you close the objective or you close the threat clock, that is what's going to move you to the next tab. Now, if the bounty hunters mark their final bullet, any bounty hunter, if you mark your 6th bullet, so your bullet 6 clock, ticks the last bullet, the tab automatically ends in failure, and you will narrate how this, again, this is related to you. The bullet is related to your past, to something very dark in your history. So if you mark off that last bullet, you're going to narrate how that failed the tab for you, how you failed that objective, and you're moved on automatically to the next tab. If you're on the Let's Jam, the 3rd tab, and you fail it, the episode ends in failure and you narrate that failure. So that's another way that the tab can end, and you have to pay attention to. But again, it's about the narrative. That might be the more interesting route to take. So take it. Just like in Star Trek Adventures, don't be scared of generating threat. That leads to the interesting parts of the episode. Go for it. Take it. Do it. Each tab has its own set of rules, as well as how difficult the tab is. So it's easy, I think, difficulty 5 for tab 1, difficulty 10, and then difficulty 15
for the final tab, and you could spend rhythm, and the big shot can spend risk to alter the difficulty of the tabs as well. They also have their own rules, such as what rhythm can be used, what riffs can be activated, and things like that. So for each tab, this is about the only kind of rules management that you have to do as the big shot, just understanding what's available for the players in each of these 3 tabs. But it's a very easy list, and I don't think that's going to slow you down. Some tabs can turn into chases. Maybe the way the story goes is it will become a chase, and then that entire tab will become a chase, which has its own special rules of how you spend your resources and your currencies, the kind of riffs you could use. But it makes it fast-paced. It makes it exciting. People could drop out of the chase and lose the target while the other players keep going, because if you stay in, you might keep filling up that bullet track and leading to a negative ending. So it is fast-paced. It is exciting. I was really excited about the chase rules. That's all in here, and it makes an entire tab a chase. When you finish a session, when you finish an episode, there's a small ending narration called "See You, Space Cowboy," which is, of course, how many of the episodes end, that little tagline. And that is how you narrate, just a way of wrapping up the story, what happened, let everyone know where all the bounty hunters are at the end of the episode. The players are the ones who come up with that, and of course with the guidance of the big shot to help piece everything together. Very thematic. It keeps everything looking like an episode of Cowboy Bebop. Now, whether or not the episode is a success or failure, it doesn't matter. Things are going to keep moving. But if it is a failure, the bounty hunters, or I should say, if the bounty hunters mark their last bullet, in either case, they are going to gain something on their character sheet called a weight. This is something dark. This is something heavy that you are carrying with you because of your failure. So it's going to become what's known as an unresolved memory. You start the game with a single memory, but this is now, this failure that you had is going to become a weight that's an unresolved memory for your character. If everyone failed, they're all going to get that weight. So these weights and the original memory, these are things that are going to later come back and haunt your character, possibly when the bullets are filled or in other ways for personal sessions. So the more weights you have, the more dangerous it is for your character as your season continues. And I will get to that in a few moments of just how dangerous it can get. In your classic session, the setup is your typical three tabs and the bounty. Personal session is focused on one character, usually when their bullets fill up. The filler, you can pick whatever style you want for the session. You could pick the tab structure that you want. There's no bounty and no genre that's needed for a filler session. But the season breakpoints, when your bounty hunters together as a group have accumulated enough weights between them, you will trigger a season breakpoint. These are the double episode ones. They are cliffhanger endings in part 1 and then resolution in part 2. This season breakpoint, they have special rules, even compared to the other types of sessions. So there's special rules, and part 1 and part 2, there's slight differences on how the rules apply to, because it wants it to feel like how the two-parters are in Cowboy Bebop anime. And it's perfect. It fits well. The problem is that the weights, should I get to that now, or might get to it later? Well, since we're talking about now, since the season finale
is also one of these season breakpoints. If you have too many weights that you didn't resolve through a personal session, so you didn't cross them off, you didn't handle on the weight that's dragging you down, it might lead to your character's demise at the end of the season, as you might be familiar with if you've seen Cowboy Bebop. It's not a happy anime. There's fun parts, but it's a very serious, it's a very deep reflective story. It's a deep reflective series that deals a lot with trauma and just how the past can haunt you. And if you let too many of these problems follow you, well, odds are that you're not going to get the good ending of your series. So keep that in mind. Okay, next is the last huge chapter I have to talk about. This is chapter 3, characters. Characters, as I shown earlier, characters very simplified, no stats, no values on anything. You just got your traits. The traits are split into 5 approaches. You can only have 3 maximum in each approach. These traits, they're just aesthetic because, as I say, it's a very visual game. It wants you to tell a story. So the traits aren't necessarily going to be something technical you're using or something mechanical you're using. It's going to be something simple like sunglasses. And how are you using sunglasses? Well, you're going to narrate in the scene of how the light's reflecting off the sunglasses as you approach the guards there. It's all about describing the cool narrative. So Rule of the Cool is a major part of Cowboy Bebop. Just looking at some of the traits here, usually they could be things like physical appearance. It might be like cybernetics they're attached to you. It could be just some technology you're carrying. But let me just read an example. For example, there's the physical appearance trait. You might have deep blue eyes. Now, let's say you wrote this as a rock trait. So it's a deep blue eyes rock trait. So in the middle of a gunfight, the character's deep blue eyes might stand out in amidst the roars of the guns and flash of rifles. Very visual, very evoking of what's happening in the scene. Maybe instead you wrote deep blue eyes as a blues trait. So if it's a blues trait, there could be a close-up of the character as they gaze at the stars, their deep blue eyes sadly fixed on the sidereal firmament. It's all about creating a striking, stunning visual as you narrate your action. It's not mechanical. It's about how that trait reflects that approach that you are taking. So it's very interesting. This might be a little tricky the first time you encounter it because for me too, it's not like anything I've seen before, like skill-wise or talent-wise in a role-playing game. So I think that's going to take me a little bit of time to adjust to, but I like the way it's done. It's all about creating the style and creating the visual because Cowboy Bebop is a very stylistic anime. It looks good, it sounds good, and it helps you remember the scenes, create these very memorable moments. Characters, as I mentioned, they have a memory. These memories are your haunted past. If you fill up the bullets on your sheet, it's going to trigger that memory. That memory, whatever that is in your past, is coming back to get you in the next episode. That's going to be a personal session. Bullets can be used to absorb shocks. Bullets can also be used to trigger an ability called Get Involved, where you add extra dice to your roll. So if it's a really important thing, you can mark off a bullet to get those extra dice, but you're just pushing yourself closer to that memory coming back for you. And again, please remember, last bullet ticked off, you fail that tab. If it's the end of the episode, you fail that episode. The episode's over. So it's really dramatic. This does not reset at the end of the episode. Hits, shots, rhythm, risk, all of that resets when each session is done, except the bullets. You're carrying it with you. Those are your weights. You're going to carry that weight. Don't forget that. Weights are the failures of your classic sessions as well, not just your memory, but when you fail, it adds that memory, new memory of that failure you did as an extra weight. If you succeed at your personal session, you could cross off one of your weights. So if you have too many uncrossed off weights at the end of the season finale, you'll calculate it, you'll do the roll and calculate it, but if you have too many, it might end up killing your character, as I mentioned. So, again, that might be the ending you're looking for. That might be the kind of dramatic way out you want to take your character. And that's fine. Go for it. It's all about the story. I keep saying it, but it's true. It's all about the story. Grooves. Each character I mentioned earlier in this review, each character has a groove. The bounty themselves have a groove. These are really the one special ability, and as the book says, they are wildly imbalanced, and some are much stronger than the others, but that's okay. They don't all have to be equal. It's designed to be that way. The one thing that the rules recommend is each character should choose a different groove for their character. They should not be using the same groove between two different characters. So try to create some originality there, but the grooves are going to be really kind of game-breaking things that your character can do uniquely, as well as the bounty you are chasing. So those are probably the only big super abilities your character will have, but each groove has its mechanical component and a narrative component of how it could be incorporated into the story. As always, maintain the narrative, maintain the story. Whew. Okay, now I think we're going to fly through the next 3 chapters, the final 3 chapters. Those were the big ones. That's where all the weird, complicated rules come in. Next 3 are very simple. Chapter 4 is Hunters in the Solar System. This explains to you in very brief detail, runs through everything you need to know about the universe of Cowboy Bebop. Talks about the economy, law, misrule, not just law, travel, spaceships. There's lots of random charts in this game. So there's random charts about creating your own mothership, like the Bebop is in the series, as well as making your mono zip craft, because each character in the series also has their own personal one-seater craft that they use. There's technology, cybernetics. This chapter is going to go through all that stuff that makes up the background of Cowboy Bebop. It will explain to you what the style of the show is like, what the style of the anime is like, and what themes to keep in mind when you are running the game to keep your series fitting the flavor of Cowboy Bebop. And it ends with a list of recommended media to get you into that mood. Aside from Cowboy Bebop, what are the other inspirations of this visual style that inspired Cowboy Bebop and should also be the basis of your own series? That's chapter 4 in a nutshell. A lot of good information there, but I'm not going to read the book to you. You gotta go get it. Chapter 5 is slightly similar. It's all of that information that it explains in chapter 4, basically, or at least it includes it, but it's showing you what happens on screen when you're playing. So chapter 5 is called On Stage. This is your episode. This is the performance that's happening. So these are all the components that make up your session. First of all, it has details on bounties, including random tables, so you can roll up a random bounty for your session, and it's page after page after page explaining to you what each type of bounty is like. But not only that, it doesn't just break down their archetype, it tells you why they are dangerous as a bounty, but also what makes them human. And that is such a huge part of Cowboy Bebop. There is more to the story than just them being a bad guy you're trying to catch. They are human. They can be sympathetic, and this explains to you why you might be able to relate to this person you are trying to catch, or who might be wanted by some corporation for something. This helps to create the conflict between you and the bounty as you're trying to catch them, because not everything is going to be black and white, and not anything in Cowboy Bebop is black and white. It gives you examples for each bounty type of the groove they could have, the secrets that they could have, because again, you can't catch them until you figure out their secret, and tips for running the story involving these types of bounty. And it's page after page explaining these archetypes. Once you roll it up, you go to that page, you read about it, bam, you got your idea for your session. There's also information about creating your own original grooves, so you don't have to pick these ones here, or your own original secrets. That's all good for if you want to be more creative than what's in the book. You got that option there. After the bounties, you got factions, because there's a lot of factions in Cowboy Bebop. There's a lot of criminal organizations. You got the Red Dragons, White Tigers, Blue Snakes, like so many other organizations there, including, and not just for these factions, but throughout this chapter, it will also have suggested memories that you might use for your character that relates to these different groups. So maybe you have a dark story connecting with one of these criminal groups, or connecting with law enforcement or corporations which run the galaxy. It goes through technology, facility, the Outernet, AI, freelancers like space truckers, religion, ideology, all these things that have made an impact in different episodes of Cowboy Bebop are explained here, and how you can present it in your sessions and use those groups for your sessions. The last part is the setting, where it takes you through all the planets in the solar system that have been colonized and that you can feature in your game, including random tables you can roll that if you're setting your session on this planet, here's what part of the planet you might be on. So this is what the mood is like. These are the type of passersby that might come around. So there's a lot in this chapter for fleshing out the look and feel of your session, from bounties all the way to the setting where they're going to take place. This is your toolbox chapter for that. And lastly, the final chapter, chapter 6, is called Playing the Bebop, and I'm giving this a red alert, because this chapter, when I saw it, first of all, it is the characters, all the main characters of Cowboy Bebop, and every episode of Cowboy Bebop broken down as a character in the game and a session in the game. And when I first saw this, I thought, okay, this is not going to be for me, because I don't want to play as the Cowboy Bebop characters. I don't want to reenact the episodes that I saw in Cowboy Bebop. I love them, but I want to do original stories. I want to play original characters. But much to my pleasant surprise, that is not what this chapter is about. It looks like it, but that is not what it's about. And it tells you flat out that's not what it's about. What this chapter is for is giving you concrete examples you can refer to understand all that confusing and complicated stuff that sounds tricky in the beginning. It shows you what it means in play. So if you've seen Cowboy Bebop, you look at the page for Spike and you see, oh, okay, so this is how Spike fits as a character in the game. This is his groove. These are his traits. This is his mono. This is his memories. Oh, I know this episode of Cowboy Bebop very well. This is what it would be like if, instead of it being a TV show, it was a session that a game master was running. So it shows you how to structure, or how each episode would be structured if it was played as a session. So when you're reading through the rules, you might see, like, how do I make this an episode? What is a groove? What the heck is a tab? What does it mean a personal session? What does it mean classic session? You have this entire, I think, roughly 100 pages of the book showing you concrete details what that looks like, because you have a whole episode you could watch and visualize it if you're still not sure. I thought that was genius genius way of breaking it down to make it clear, because as I said, there's a lot of terminology that is confusing. It's very confusing, but at the same time, it might take you a few times to read through that terminology and get a grasp on it, but you could just jump back to chapter 6 and see, okay, I get it. I see what it means. This is what a rock session would look like. This is what a tango objective would look like. It was this in this episode. This is what a trait would be like. Oh, okay, so Spike has this as his trait. So, okay, I get that. And that's a rock trait because he used it in these ways. Perfect addition. The only thing I might change is because it's such a large part of the book, and even though it's every episode, I still felt like I wanted a little more play by play in each episode, just to get 100% unequivocal, clear idea of what each step of the way meant. So I might have wanted maybe one example of each episode type, or maybe two examples of each type, but much more detail, breaking it down rather than every single episode in the series. It's just a personal thing, not really a gripe, but I might have appreciated it better. Aside from that, the last thing after chapter 6 is the glossary. So if you need to check immediately what one of those terms you're not familiar with means, you just flip right to the back, bam, there's your glossary. It will remind you exactly what that means and what that represents. Very handy, very useful. And there it is. I think I'm done with the review. So here I am back. The pros for Cowboy Bebop: it's very thematic. It feels like the anime. So you could even run it as the anime because you have all the characters there. But it's designed for you to run your own Cowboy Bebop style series, and it feels like it. The way, just like Star Trek Adventures, mechanics make it feel like an episode of Star Trek. Cowboy Bebop's mechanics really make it feel like a session from the anime. The second pro I have is I think the episodic nature fits perfectly into this. You don't want that sandbox feel in a series that is as heavy as Cowboy Bebop. I think they took the right path to make it episodic. And my final pro is the fact that it's so narrative. Not really relying on dice roll skills, not too much random chance. It's there, but it's designed to be a group storytelling experience. I don't think you could do Cowboy Bebop better than that, because it's about creating a self-enclosed story from start to finish with troubled characters and exciting situations, and instead of leaving that to chance, it allows you to determine if you want to fail, if you want to succeed, because you're spending your hits, you could spend it towards failure. It wants you to craft the best story ever. There you go. Some cons that I have written down for this is, again, I mentioned many times, but the terminology, the music-based terminology, can be quite confusing. So keep that in mind. There is the glossary, and there's the great examples in chapter 6 to make it more clearly make sense to you. So use that. Some players I know might be turned off by lack of leveling, because you're not really leveling up your characters. You don't really have points. You're not growing characters in that sense. You're growing in the sense of them overcoming the troubles, the weights in their lives, but it's not really a D&D type system you're leveling up. Third con I have is, even though it's a very rules light system, an extremely rules light system, there are some really specific things that the big shot, the GM, has to keep in mind for each tab. So that might be a little bit confusing and a little bit jarring, considering how basically free the rest of the game is. But I think once you have a little list in front of you, or you have the page open in front of you for each of those tabs, it should be no problem. And the last con is the narration, the driving of the story. The onus is on the players, and a lot of players might not be comfortable with that. because that's taking a large part of what a GM usually does, and it's giving that to the players. The GM's guiding the story and adding their own narration for their part, but the majority of it is going to be dictated and narrated by each of the players. And some players might not be comfortable with that. They might not know what to do, but I think as a group, you could work together, find a way to tell that story together as a group, with the big shot included, the GM included, to help it go smoothly. Overall, so impressed with how this turned out, especially after following the Kickstarter and not really getting the hang of the playtest, but seeing these final rules, I love it, and I'm looking forward to trying it out. I hope I get to try it out very soon with my group. I do recommend checking out, or at least check out the quick start rules on DriveThruRPG. Download them, check it out, see if you like it, give it a shot. But I'm leaning towards more narrative games at this point in my life, and this is probably the most narrative game I've found yet. I love Star Trek Adventures, and I could see myself loving this for the exact same reasons. So there we go. Long review, but there was a lot to discuss here. I hope I didn't bore you all too much, but thank you for our debut Holodeck Adventure. I hope you enjoyed your time here in the holodeck exploring the world of Cowboy Bebop, and I hope you'll at least check it out and see if it's for you. But as always, thank you for watching, and see you, Space Cowboy.